The morning sun hit the glass towers of the city with a blinding glare, but inside the executive suite of Silvergate Holdings, the atmosphere was as cold as a mountain peak. Julian Vane, the CEO, sat at his mahogany desk, his eyes scanning a spreadsheet that detailed the lives of 300 employees in the form of cold, hard percentages. To Julian, people were overhead, assets, or liabilities. He didn't know their names. He only knew their productivity scores. He was preparing for a merger that would make him the most powerful man in the industry, a deal that required him to sign off on another 100 layoffs. His hand didn't tremble as he reached for his fountain pen. He had built his world on logic, and logic had no room for sentiment. As he walked through the lobby to head to his morning briefing, a small tug on his sleeve stopped him. He looked down to see a boy, no older than 7, wearing a faded backpack and looking up with eyes that seemed too heavy for his age. "You're Mr. Vane, right?" the boy asked, his voice a soft, scratchy whisper. Julian checked his watch. "I'm busy, kid. Where are your parents?" The boy didn't answer the question. Instead, he stood on his toes and leaned toward Julian's ear. "There's a camera in your office," he whispered. "It sees the things you don't." Before Julian could respond, the boy turned and disappeared into the crowd of morning commuters. Julian stood frozen for a second, a strange chill running down his spine. He dismissed it as a prank, but the whisper stayed with him like a persistent hum. When he reached his office on the 50th floor, he looked around. It was a masterpiece of modern design, minimalist, expensive, and sterile. Driven by a sudden, irrational urge, he began to search. He checked the smoke detectors, the vents, and the back of the paintings. Finally, tucked behind a heavy volume of law books on the top shelf, he found it. A tiny, pinhole lens, barely visible, connected to a small wireless transmitter. His first instinct was rage. Corporate espionage? A rival trying to steal his merger plans? He immediately called his head of security, a man named Thomas who had served under Julian for a decade. "Find out where this feed goes," Julian barked, slamming the tiny device onto his desk. "I want the person responsible in handcuffs by sunset." 2 hours later, Thomas returned, but he didn't look triumphant. He looked shaken. "Sir, the feed wasn't going to a competitor. It was being broadcast to a private, encrypted cloud drive. We managed to gain access to the archives. It's not what you think." Julian sat in front of the monitors as Thomas played the footage. He expected to see himself at his desk, but the timestamp on the first video was 2 a.m. The screen flickered to life. The office was dark, illuminated only by the city lights outside. A woman in a blue cleaning uniform entered. It was Maria, the night janitor who had worked for the building for 15 years. She didn't clean. Instead, she sat in Julian's high-backed leather chair. She looked exhausted, her shoulders slumped. She pulled a small, crushed photo from her pocket and whispered to it. "I did it, Leo," she murmured, her voice thick with tears. "The first month of your college is paid. I'll keep working the double shifts. Just keep studying. Don't end up like your mother, cleaning the floors of people who don't know your name." She sat there for 10 minutes, just breathing, before getting up to polish the desk she had just sat at. Julian felt a lump form in his throat. He gestured for Thomas to play the next one. This time, it was a mid-level manager named David. He had been with the company for 8 years. In the video, David stood in the center of the office, practicing a speech. "Mr. Vane, please. My wife is sick. If I lose this job, we lose the insurance. I've given everything to this company. Please, just give me 6 months." He broke down, burying his face in his hands, before quietly leaving the room, never having the courage to actually say the words to Julian. Video after video played. It was a gallery of ghosts. Employees who came into the office when it was empty just to feel a moment of peace, or to cry where no one could see them. They treated the office like a confessional, unaware that a hidden lens was capturing the human cost of Julian's efficiency. The last video broke Julian completely. It showed the same young boy from the lobby. He was sitting on the floor under the desk while his grandmother, Maria, cleaned the room. He was reading a book by the light of a small flashlight. He looked up at the camera, then at his grandmother's tired back, and then at the empty chair where Julian usually sat. He walked over to the chair and left a small, folded paper bird on the seat. Julian looked down. There, tucked into the crease of the leather he sat on every day, was the paper bird. He hadn't even noticed it. He realized then that the camera wasn't a weapon. It was a mirror. It was showing him the soul of the company he had turned into a machine. He saw the faces behind the percentages. He saw the mothers, the fathers, and the dreamers who were terrified of the man he had become. The next morning, the board members arrived for the merger meeting. They expected a celebratory signing. Instead, they found Julian standing in the atrium, the monitors behind him playing the footage of his employees, not their faces, to protect their privacy, but their stories, narrated by Julian himself. "The merger is off," Julian announced, his voice echoing through the hall. "We are not expanding until we learn how to take care of the people we already have." He fired the department heads who had fostered a culture of fear. He established a fund for Maria's son's education and created a healthcare plan that actually covered the needs of people like David. He turned his office into a listening room, where for 2 hours every day, the door was open to anyone, regardless of their rank. Julian never found the person who installed the camera, but he suspected it was an old IT specialist who had been laid off a year prior, a man who wanted Julian to see what he had lost. Weeks later, Julian saw the boy in the lobby again. This time, Julian didn't look at his watch. He knelt down so he was at the boy's eye level. "Is the camera still there?" the boy asked. Julian smiled, a real, warm smile that reached his eyes. "No, son. I don't need the camera anymore. I finally learned how to look." The boy nodded, handed him another paper bird, and walked away. Julian watched him go, knowing that for the first time in his life, he wasn't just a CEO. He was a man who saw the world.